we are joined by Faded Spade's founder, correct? You founded Faded Spades?
Yes,
Faded
sir.
Spade? Awesome. Well, thank you for joining the podcast today.
You bet, man. Thanks for having me. I want to make it real clear. Hopefully, you can still hear me all right.
I
That
can. Sounds better.
this is definitely like not something that is brand specific. I'm not here to talk about one brand of cards versus the other. Just to offer insight into some of the behaviors that we saw, some of the things we do and most other card companies do in terms of like card marking, security, and things like that. So happy to be here, man.
Awesome. Yeah, I think your perspective is going to be very unique, right? Because you actually manufacture decks. Did you guys manufacture the ones that are used at the World Series?
No, World Series of Poker uses a completely different brand. We obviously have worked with Poker Go for quite some time. So I will say flat out, guys, Poker Go has some of the best security measures. And obviously, they're the production company for WSOP. They have some of the best security measures in the industry when it comes to card security. Of all the organizations we work with, they're top of the line, one of the best. So I have full confidence in them that if there's something going on, they're going to know about it. They're going to tell us about it. And if they thought something was happening while it was going on, they probably would have changed the decks out or stopped the game. So I just want to put that out there. I do know their security measures and their protocols are top of industry.
All right, guys. I messed with Tom's mic settings a little bit. Let me know if that's better. Tom, keep yours how it is. I can control it on my side, and I just want to make sure that it's good for the viewers. I lowered the volume a little bit and edited out the echo. Let's see if that works. Okay, so as far as marking cards go, did you get to see the clips where Martin was pressing into the cards? I think a lot of people are questioning whether that's creating indentation on the cards that you could then see by looking over at the cards. What's your thought on that theory?
Yeah, this is actually really specific thought. So, Doug, I got the Yeti mic going. We should be fine.
I think
But
it's good.
like the deal is this: like, there's a thing called core strength, right? And core strength is like really important for cards, especially when it comes to poker. And like when we were developing our brand 6 years ago, core strength is really important because from a behavioral standpoint, the actions he was taking when he was like folding cards and pressing those three fingers into the center of the card, that is literally a behavior that we know people who try to make cards do, right?
Oh,
Like that
interesting.
is against that because what can happen is even if it's not like a nail mark in the middle of the card, you can indent the core. So at different angles based on lighting, you can see that
Ooh,
indent. Like so like again, I'm not saying anything like that. I'm just providing insight in terms of things that
very
we
interesting.
as a leading card company try to protect against. So again though, I will say like I know I'm kind of like covering a little bit, but like I think if Poker Go really saw those indents in cards, like they would have changed the decks out. But that is a behavior that known card markers do to the center of the card.
Wow, that's fascinating. So I guess let me try to understand this a little bit better. It's not indent in the card in like a traditional playing card way. It's about like the core of the card, is what you're saying?
Yeah, you have two areas you really want to protect on a card. You want to protect the core through core strength, which can be like through
Sounds like an ab
thickness.
workout.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, which I need. You're a dad now, the dad bod. I'm trying to get to where you're at, bro.
Taking
So
notes.
it's like the core strength is like really important because people can mark the core. You can see the indents, whether they're nail marks or not, depending upon lighting. Um, Corner strength is also really important, right? Because if certain cards are maybe have a fingernail in the corner or a certain corner is indented, people can look for that corner and be able to tell what kind of card it is. Now, what's great is the cards that WSOP uses like follow a lot of security measures. They have borders. It's really tough to see marking, I'm sure. Important to know RFID cards compared to regular playing cards are much more harder to mark because they're technically usually thicker. So like, but core and corner is what card companies try and protect against when it comes to marking.
Very interesting. I think we saw in some of the clips pushing down more on the corner and in some more in the center. Is it in your experience, have you seen people use both of these techniques at once, or did people typically use one, or what do you think?
I'm sure if people who are well versed in this and exhibit that behavior, they're probably doing both. I don't know if it's one or the other, but again, like these are things that a Poker Go, I'm sure, is looking out for. The
Right.
other thing to note is this: like it could just be a behavioral antic that like this guy is used to doing if the allegations against him from so many other players are that he's known for doing this, right? So he could have been doing this during the tournament with the regular cards and having success with it, but not having success with it at the feature table or final table because RFID cards are thicker to mark, right? But I do have to believe that like a lot of operators are trained in this, they know this, and they'd be looking out for it.
Yeah, I think they do a great job in general at Poker Go, and I imagine they would be a lot more on top of it than other people would. But is this the kind of thing? So one of the things that I thought when I saw the kind of playing with the cards was, well, if I was a player at the table and I saw someone doing that, then of course when I get dealt cards or as cards being dealt, I'm going to be looking, right? I'm going to be watching these cards. Are these markings something that even just like your average everyday poker player would be able to tell pretty clearly, or are these things that
No,
would be? Oh, interesting.
no. So like if I was any player at that table, and I'm not a high stakes player, I'm a mid stakes player, but if I saw that behavior, I'd call their ass out right away. So I like commend Dan and others who called it out right away because that's not normal behavior. It just isn't. Um, but like what most people look out for are nail markings, right? So most people will just look out to see if like the corner has a nail marking or some kind of obvious blemish. To a trained eye, a lot of these folks who are marking cards, like again, it could be lighting, it could be the way the core
Describe
indents with it.
describe the lighting to me. Like, what do you mean by lighting? Like the
So
way
think
that.
about it. Yeah, so think about this, right? You played at a ton of eight-handed tables, six-handed tables, and lighting is different depending upon what seat you're in and et cetera. So I look at this, and if there's somebody trying to mark the corner of, I'm sorry, if there's somebody trying to mark the center of a card through an indent or something, some kind of like an indent versus a nail mark that a lot of people won't see, that indent is going to be visible at different angles based on different lighting in different ways. So seat three might be able to look at the center of the card and not see any type of difference, whereas seat four or five or six might be able to, depending upon all those factors. So like again, not making allegations, but like I've seen people do those antics where they're standing up, looking at the cards from different angles, and maybe they're trying to see something that they've actually done before. These are known behaviors of people who mark cards in poker or any casino game, which is why companies like Faded Spade and I'm sure competitor companies during QA processes, they're testing for this. They're testing to make sure that the cards are the right thickness, to make if they're really digging into it, that those indentations don't happen or those markings don't happen. Um, I can't comment to the thickness or the flexibility or whatever of
Right.
other cards, but I know that's something we do. Like we literally make sure there's a core strength. So if someone is pressing down the center, like that indent doesn't happen. But we know card people who mark cards are doing these things to try and gain an edge.
Interesting. So going back to the lighting thing, because I think that one's a bit more interesting than just the marking the corners. The corners one with an indentation, I just feel like that's going to get caught by players.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
the center of the card with the lighting is that would then be difficult for a player to see easily to see quickly. Would that
You might
explain like
not
checking for different angles as well to see where the light reflects?
you might not see it right in front of you, but you might be able to see it at a distance.
Mm,
And that's just a fact. Like it's not like an allegation; it's just a fact. So I don't blame any of the players for speaking up. I'm glad they did. Doug, I remember a few years ago when you spoke up in the Poker Go studio about some decks you thought might have been marked, and those were
oh,
actually faded spade decks at the time.
oh, I
And
remember
you have
that.
every right to do that, and players should do that. And I remember watching that as the owner of Faded Spade with our cards on the table, saying, "I'm glad that that happened because if players don't speak up, then sometimes it's hard for operators to tell."
Well, also as the deck manufacturer, if decks are marked, obviously you're putting your best decks out there, right? But if a deck is marked, that's not your work. That's someone taking your work and using it for cheating. Of course, you want people to get caught that are doing that. The event you're talking about was actually the one drop that I won in
I remember.
2017. We were
Sick
five or
brag,
six.
bro.
Thank you, thank you. Didn't see that coming, but thank you. We were like 5 or 6 handed, and I got dealt my cards, and I looked at the back of them, and I'm like, these are marked. And I looked, and I'm like, oh, those are marked. And I realized that pretty clearly a lot of the cards had been marked in that deck. I don't even know how long we were using them. And at this point, I wasn't an operator. I was barely even a live poker player. My career had all been online, but I could see the markings on those cards. You have to wonder, how long were those cards being used? Why did this not get caught before? Who at the table might have already caught on to this? Did someone just not saying anything? Because When I said, I'm like, guys, stop play. These are marked. And I remember they paused it, and I was in the tag team at the time, and I ran to the tournament. And got dealt a couple hands. And I ran back to play my final table. Anyway, side story. But anyway, the point of the matter is, like, you see cards that are marked somewhat often, and I think as like a production, and what was said to us, by the way, was like it could have been the shuffler, right, that was making the marks, which adds a little layer of complexity to this. So some streams are hand shuffle, some streams are automated shuffle. In your experience, do automated shufflers, automatic shufflers, do those create markings on cards?
They absolutely can, yeah. So different card brands have different settings for different automatic shufflers. So like a faded spade card might have a certain thickness, a certain size that's different than a competitor card, right? Like the ones used at WSOP, versus like WPT or MGM or whatever. So like if those settings aren't specifically set for the card brand that's using, maybe it's too tight, maybe it's too short, then yeah, they could absolutely leave those markings. I will say like operators are really good at correcting settings when that happens. We'll have card rooms like Lodge, right? Lodge doesn't use automatic shufflers, but at the same time, they moved to us because of card security, talking to Joe. And a lot of companies do that, but when they do that, they might replace faded spade decks with their old decks, and they have to change the automatic shuffler settings specifically for those decks. Before they do, that's going to leave marks. It can leave
Right.
corner marks, it can leave center marks. So, absolutely, to answer your question, automatic shufflers can play a role in it, but I believe wholeheartedly that Poker Go and WSOP have that completely figured out and configured accurately.
Makes sense to me. One note for the viewers: if you're playing in a game with an automatic shuffler and you are at a non-licensed venue, leave the game immediately, because the operators of those will only maintain them at licensed venues. If you're at a home game and there's an automatic shuffler, that means a person is setting it up to fix it. They have to buy it secondhand, the black market. Do not play with unregulated card shufflers. It is way safer to have a hand shuffle at those types of venues. So specifically, if you're playing in Texas, do not play with an automatic shuffler. Briefly here, I just want to mention for people on Twitter Spaces, we are joined right now by Tom Wheaton of Faded Spades. And in 10 minutes, roughly, we're going to be joined by Chance Corneth to talk about his thoughts on it. Of course, Chance had a pretty long tweet earlier today with his thoughts about cheating or not cheating. Moving away from actually, just to finish off with the card game integrity thing, is there anything that players can be doing to protect themselves in situations like this? Is there any advice that you have? I think as like, your perspective is so unique because we have all these people with all these thoughts, but you create cards, so you have like this perspective. Is there something that players can do to protect themselves that might not seem on first thought like something that they should be doing? How can players make sure that there's not cheating going on in their games?
Don't be afraid to speak up. Like the goal of any operator, and of course any card brand that's a vendor of an operator, is for game integrity. And cards, whether they're plastic or paper, no matter how high quality they are, like humans or shufflers or whatever, they can leave markings intentionally or unintentionally. So just speak up. They'll change out the deck. It is not hard. Like they've got operators have tons of decks in the back. They have tons of decks on hand specifically for these reasons. So like if you feel like someone's marking a card, or even if you feel like the deck has just been in use for quite some time and they could use a fresh deck because maybe you're picking up on things, and if you're picking up on things and have integrity, other people could be picking up on things and maybe they don't have integrity. So just ask for it to be changed. I think that's totally fair. A lot of operators will be changing out decks like every few dealers, right? So it's like every dealer turn, they should be changing out one color deck for the other most of the time, depending on state regulations. But it's very rare that you'll be playing with the same two decks for any like 10-hour period of time.
Right, makes sense. What are your thoughts on what should happen from an operator perspective, or maybe even from a player pool's perspective? Are these antics over the line? Is this a point where we should be banning this player, warning this player, or what are your thoughts?
I have a hard time with it because, like, from the common sense, like naked eye perspective, with my experience being in this industry as a player, as like literally a card brand like owner, like I look at that and say this guy is exhibiting all the behaviors of someone who's trying to mark cards. But I don't have any proof of that except witnessing that behavior. I think like Poker Go or any operator would be able to know fairly quickly post game after inspection of the decks if this was happening. And I'm sure they would do something about it. Like, I really believe that. I will say I see in chat, and like we were talking about it before, like could there be like this X-ray vision solution on the card, and do they have like X-ray glasses or contacts that can see UV markings and stuff? Like, I think the probability of that is extremely low. Like that would be found out right away, like like that, right? Especially post game.
Oh
So I
yeah.
think like a
Oh yeah.
lot of
Sorry.
that kind of stuff is
While we're on that,
conspiracy theory.
so when we're talking about sticky hands or like invisible marks or like marks where you have like contacts that can see the marks, are you familiar with any stuff like that? Do those things actually work? I mean, I know that there's been people banned for that. Like I think there's a story from France like 10 years ago where someone got caught for that. But is there like an invisible ink / contacts thing? Is that possible?
Sure, like there are UV coatings that you could put on anything, and that certain glasses will show like the UV marking. Like that's not just cards, that's like anything, right? But like I would say like the success rate of somebody trying that and the ability to see that right after the game is like very apparent because it just would be, right? I think like that would be one of the last things people would do. To be honest, I think it's much more along the lines of these more consistent behaviors we see with, center or core kind of marking or corner marking.
Why is it just to talk about that again? Because I find this kind of fascinating. I did a little Googling. I saw there's like some kits you can buy online. I almost wanted to buy one, but I didn't want to get scammed. Um, why is it that it would be one of the last things you try? It's like it's invisible ink, right? So people would only be able to see it if they had the UV vision or whatever it would be. Why would it be so easy to get someone caught like that? Like, I guess
In
why?
my mind, yeah. So, like in my opinion, like the tools that an operator could use during the game or after the game to find that out right away, it would be instant, right? You'd be instantly caught.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's just my opinion on the subject. I have never seen that in my professional career. I haven't like experienced that. I've only heard or seen, the stuff that I'm talking about.
Right. Okay. So that isn't exactly a great method then either. So really,
Yeah.
like this interview, this part of the talk is really interesting to me because I feel like I'm pivoting away from some of my earlier takes, which were kind of like, well, it's probably not indentation because players would notice. Maybe it's some advanced thing like ink with contacts. Now maybe I'm going back
I
the other
don't
way.
know.
Like, but so with the indentations though, like the World Series should still have those decks, right? So
Oh, I'm
could it
sure they do. Yeah.
can't they just check them for the things that you're saying? I mean, I'm
Sure.
sure that's like step one, right? Like, wouldn't you imagine they've done that?
Sure. I'm sure they've done. I'm sure they are doing that. I mean, look, like I said, I've worked with so many of the people who were involved with those productions and I hold them in the highest regard. And my assumption is that because of their professional nature, because of their seriousness about game integrity, they already have done those tests or they are doing those tests. Like I really believe that. And I also believe like if there's something to come out of it, they will share that publicly. I really do. Like knowing
Right.
those people. Um, when it comes to these types of card markings, like we're talking about, Doug, those core markings or those corner markings, like it's like 6 to 1, half dozen the other. Like the reason why I think that's more readily used to someone with a trained eye is because the feedback afterwards if someone is accused is, well, that kind of stuff can just happen during normal gameplay.
Right.
That type of stuff can just happen when someone's looking at their cards regularly, depending upon how they're using them. And that's why I lean towards like that stuff being done a lot more um, to a trained eye versus any of this like, third hand kind of like liquid or markings or stuff like that.
So then, what do you think then? Given that Poker Go is running the show here, and given the amount of the care that they take towards this, do you think that this guy cheated or not? What do you think?
I think he exhibited the behaviors of what we in the poker card industry guard against: core marking and corner marking. I think those behaviors were exhibited, and it's blunt, dude. Like when you're folding a card and pressing your three fingers into the middle of it,
Yeah.
right? Like that's not something someone can like defend. Like that's not a tick. Like that's like a intentional type movement, right?
Yeah.
So I see that and I'm like, it doesn't make me feel good. didn't make the other players feel good, which is why they spoke up. If he's truly doing it as a tactic to frustrate people or annoy people, if he's doing that because it's something this guy has a behavior of doing in the past and maybe wasn't getting away with it with an RFID card because they're thicker. Honestly, Doug, like, I don't know. All I can know is that all I can say from a professional opinion, like, the behaviors that were being exhibited are literally the things that most card companies will try and guard against and use during QA to make sure that cards are not easily markable.
That is fascinating. And it moves the conversation over a little bit more into the World Series of Poker's department of how in depth are they looking at these decks. But I assume they are. And then we're back.
Yeah. Look,
it's
Doug,
so tough. It's so tough because it's like you're like, oh man, but then they have the decks, and I'm sure they look for this, and if it's not there, then what? Like, you know what I'm saying?
Doug, I say this without World Series of Poker as a customer. Like I'm positive they're doing what they need to do. These guys, World Series of Poker. Like, look, transparency. Fade and Spade were the official cards of the World Poker Tour. We're not the official cards of the World Series of Poker. I still believe World Series of Poker, Poker Productions, anybody involved with that is going to do the absolute right thing to try and get to the bottom of it. So I would say, like, whatever they come up with, in terms of a response, is something like we need to take as like truth. I really do. I have that type of faith in them, even though they're not, direct customers.
All right, awesome, Tom. Thank you for joining us today and give us some interesting takes on manufacturing cards. It's good to get that perspective. I think that it was needed to add to the discussion, and certainly gives us a different. We can look at it with a new light, or shine a new light on the subject. I don't know.
Hey, I see what you did there.
Trying to work a little joke in there. All right, thank you, Tom.
Thomas didn't even have to write that for you. Like,
no, I did that off the cuff, man. Off the cuff. Sometimes I have my own jokes. All right, thank you, Tom. Appreciate you joining.
All right, man. Good talking to you.